Malcolm and Jamal Harris stare at the flight attendants' termination notices spread across their attorney's desk. Flashback to the twins celebrating their scholarship to Harvard Law in first-class seats. Sudden appearance of flight attendant asking them to move for protocol reasons. Malcolm's phone recording light blinks red. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. You won't believe how these brilliant young men turned a humiliating moment into a victory that changed airline policy forever. Malcolm and Jamal Harris weren't just any 25-year-old identical twins from Atlanta. Their resemblance went beyond their dark brown skin, 6-foot athletic builds, and closely cropped hair. Both shared an unrelenting drive that had propelled them through Morehouse College with summa cum laude honors, finishing first and third in their class, respectively. Their journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in South Atlanta, they'd navigated neighborhoods where success stories were rare. Their mother Elaine, a dedicated nurse working double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, and father Curtis, a high school history teacher and basketball coach, had instilled in them the value of education from an early age. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far," Curtis would remind them. "But that's exactly what you'll do." And they had. Beyond their academic excellence, both had been deeply involved in community programs, tutoring underprivileged youth and organizing voter registration drives. Malcolm, the more outspoken of the two, had led the college debate team to national championships, while Jamal had founded a mentorship program that paired college students with local high schoolers. Their hard work had culminated in the ultimate prize. Both had been awarded full scholarships to Harvard Law School, an achievement that left their parents bursting with pride. "We can't give you much," Elaine had said, wiping away tears at their graduation dinner, "but we wanted to do something special." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were 2 first-class tickets to Boston, where they would visit the Harvard campus before the fall semester began. The twins knew immediately what this meant. Their parents had saved for months, perhaps years, to afford this luxury. "We can't accept this," Jamal had protested softly, always mindful of others' sacrifices. "You absolutely will," Curtis had insisted, his voice firm but eyes glistening. "For once in your lives, you're going to sit up front where you belong." The morning of the flight, the twins arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport dressed in crisp button-downs and slacks. They approached the Delta Airlines premium check-in counter with a mixture of excitement and slight nervousness. The check-in agent, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, had smiled genuinely as she processed their tickets. "Congratulations on Harvard Law," she said, noticing the university sweatshirts they carried. "You must be very proud." Boarding the aircraft, they were greeted by flight attendants Brenda Miller, a blonde woman in her 40s with a tight smile, and Thomas White, a tall man with graying temples who barely made eye contact as he welcomed them aboard. Despite this lukewarm reception, the twins settled into their spacious seats 2A and 2B with barely contained excitement, taking selfies to send to their parents and friends. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Brenda asked, her tone professional if not particularly warm. "Just water, thank you," they replied almost in unison, exchanging amused glances at their twin synchronicity. A well-dressed older black couple across the aisle smiled at them. The woman, who later introduced herself as Florence Bennett, leaned over. "First time in first class, dears. Is it that obvious?" Malcolm laughed. "Only because of the wonder in your eyes," Florence's husband Walter said kindly. "Enjoy every minute. You've earned it." For the next 20 minutes, the first-class cabin filled with passengers. The twins noticed a camaraderie among many of the travelers who seemed to recognize each other as frequent flyers. They exchanged pleasantries with an Asian businessman to their right and a middle-aged white woman behind them who recommended restaurants in Boston. Malcolm was browsing the in-flight entertainment options when he noticed a commotion at the front of the plane. A white man in an expensive suit appeared to be having an animated conversation with the gate agent at the entrance. Malcolm nudged his brother, but Jamal was already engrossed in a book about constitutional law. Probably nothing, Malcolm murmured to himself, turning back to the screen. He couldn't have known how wrong he was. The white businessman, who they would later learn was Raymond Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Investments, boarded the plane 15 minutes after the final boarding call. His tailored navy suit couldn't hide his reddening face as he stormed down the jetway, pulling a Toomey carry-on with one hand while clutching a leather portfolio in the other. "This is completely unacceptable," Sullivan snapped at no one in particular as he stepped into the first-class cabin. His voice carried that distinct tone of someone unaccustomed to inconvenience. "I've been a platinum member for 15 years. Flight attendant Brenda Miller rushed forward, her previous professional detachment replaced by an almost obsequious concern. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm so terribly sorry for the confusion. Let me help you get settled." Sullivan checked his boarding pass, then scanned the cabin with narrowed eyes. His gaze landed on Malcolm and Jamal, lingering just long enough to make the brothers exchange glances. "There seems to be a problem with my seat assignment," Sullivan said, voice lowered but still audible to nearby passengers. Brenda consulted her tablet, her brow furrowing. She whispered something to her colleague Thomas White, who nodded and approached the twins. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice overly formal. "There seems to be a seating issue we need to address." Malcolm looked up from his screen. "Is something wrong with our seats?" "Not exactly wrong," Thomas replied, shifting his weight. "But we need to accommodate some reassignments. Would you mind moving to economy class? We'll be happy to refund the fare difference." Jamal set his book down. "I'm sorry, but these are our assigned seats. We have the boarding passes right here." He pulled the documents from his pocket, displaying them. Thomas barely glanced at the passes. "Yes, well, sometimes the computer makes errors. It's actually airline protocol in certain situations to reassign seating." "What situations exactly?" Malcolm asked, an edge creeping into his voice. Years of experiencing certain situations had taught him to recognize coded language. Thomas cleared his throat. "Platinum member accommodations, balance issues on the aircraft, that sort of thing." By now, other passengers were watching the exchange. Sullivan stood in the aisle, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Some of us have important meetings to get to," Sullivan interjected. "This kind of inefficiency is exactly why I've considered switching to American Airlines." Jamal, always the diplomat, smiled politely. "We understand the challenges of airline logistics, but we've purchased these specific seats. Our parents saved up to give us this graduation gift." Brenda joined Thomas, her voice lowered to a whisper that still carried to nearby seats. "This is becoming a situation. Mr. Sullivan is one of our most valued customers." Malcolm felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when stopped for routine checks by campus security at Morehouse or followed by store employees while shopping. Quietly, he reached for his phone and activated the recording function, placing it on his lap with the camera partially obscured by his napkin. "I'm confused," Malcolm said calmly, his debate training evident in his measured tone. "Is there a mechanical reason we need to move, or is it because that gentleman wants our seats?" Thomas straightened his posture. "If you continue to be difficult, you may cause a delay for everyone on board. Is that what you want?" Florence Bennett, the elderly woman across the aisle, leaned forward. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. These young men were seated here before that gentleman arrived late. How is this their problem?" Thomas barely acknowledged her. "Ma'am, I'm handling an airline procedural matter." Sullivan's patience visibly thinned. "Look, I don't have time for this. I'm a business class passenger, and I expect certain standards. The airline should be capable of seating passengers efficiently." Malcolm noticed Sullivan never directly addressed them, speaking instead about them as if they were objects rather than people sitting right there. The realization solidified his resolve. "We're not moving," he said quietly but firmly. We've purchased these tickets legitimately. There's no safety reason to relocate us. If the gentleman needs a seat, perhaps he could take an available one in economy." Sullivan's face darkened. "Do you have any idea who I am? I bring millions in business to this airline annually." "No sir, I don't know who you are," Malcolm replied evenly, "but that doesn't change the fact that these are our assigned seats." Brenda's smile disappeared entirely. "If you refuse to comply with crew member instructions, I'll need to involve the captain. This could result in your removal from the flight." Jamal placed a calming hand on his brother's arm, feeling the tension in Malcolm's muscles. "We're not refusing to comply with safety instructions," Jamal clarified. "We're declining to give up seats we've legally purchased without a valid reason." The confrontation had now captured the attention of the entire first-class cabin and several rows of economy passengers who could see through the divider curtain. Thomas stepped away to make a call on the aircraft phone, while Brenda attempted to placate Sullivan. "This is ridiculous," Sullivan muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "In my day, people understood how things worked." Malcolm's phone continued recording as the situation escalated from uncomfortable to potentially life-altering. Neither twin could have predicted just how significant this recording would become. "We're not moving," Malcolm repeated, his voice calm but resolute as Thomas returned from his phone call. "These are our assigned seats, purchased legally, and we have every right to remain in them." Jamal nodded in agreement. Though typically more reserved than his brother, his silence now carried equal determination. The twins' synchronized stance created a powerful image, two young black men refusing to be displaced despite mounting pressure. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I've just spoken with Supervisor Keith Peterson. He's on his way to address the situation." "Good," Malcolm replied. "Perhaps he can explain exactly which airline policy requires paying customers to surrender their assigned seats to accommodate late arrivals." Sullivan paced the small area near the galley, ostentatiously checking his Rolex every few moments. "This is outrageous," he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Absolute amateur hour." Within minutes, Keith Peterson appeared at the cabin entrance. In his mid-50s with thinning blonde hair and a perpetual frown, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to having the final word. "Gentlemen," he addressed the twins without introducing himself. "I understand there's a seating issue. I need you to gather your belongings and follow me." "There's no issue with our seating," Jamal responded politely. "We're in our assigned seats." Keith's frown deepened. "This isn't a negotiation. The crew has made a decision based on airline protocol. Compliance with crew member instructions is required by federal law." Malcolm's phone continued recording as he calmly replied, "We're happy to comply with safety-related instructions. However, being asked to surrender our purchased seats without cause isn't a safety issue, it's a customer service issue." Florence Bennett, the elderly woman across the aisle, spoke up again. "Young man, you're absolutely right. My husband Walter and I have been flying first class for 40 years, and we've never seen anything like this." Keith barely glanced at the Bennetts. "With all due respect, ma'am, you don't understand our policies and procedures." "Actually," Walter Bennett countered, his voice carrying the weight of his 70 years, "as former airline executives, we understand them quite well. These young men are being discriminated against, plain and simple." Keith's face flushed. "This has nothing to do with, Federal Aviation Regulation 121.586 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry," Malcolm interjected, drawing on knowledge from his pre-law studies. "It seems relevant in this context." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Sullivan, growing increasingly agitated, failed to control his volume as he leaned toward Brenda. "Look, I'm a platinum member. These seats should go to passengers who actually belong in first class." The comment hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Malcolm's finger pressed the zoom button on his recording app, capturing Sullivan's face and badge clearly. "Sir," Jamal addressed Keith directly, "what is the specific reason we're being asked to move? If there's a legitimate airline policy, we'd like to understand it." Keith glanced at Sullivan, then back at the twins. "I don't have to explain company policy to you. You need to comply now, or I'll be forced to call security." "Please do," Malcolm replied. "We're not being disruptive. We're sitting in our assigned seats. If security needs to determine who's in the wrong here, we welcome their assessment." Keith's nostrils flared as he reached for the aircraft phone. The tension in the cabin was palpable as he requested security assistance, describing a situation with uncooperative passengers. While they waited, Brenda and Thomas huddled near the galley with Keith, occasionally glancing toward the twins. Sullivan had taken a seat in an empty first-class spot, scrolling through his phone with exaggerated nonchalance. Florence Bennett leaned across the aisle again. "Stand your ground, boys," she whispered. "We're witnesses to everything." 10 minutes later, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. Officer Jackson, a tall black man with a shaved head, and Officer Davis, a shorter white woman with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, approached with professional neutrality. "What seems to be the problem?" Officer Jackson asked, addressing the question to the cabin at large. Keith stepped forward. "These passengers are refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding seating reassignments. May I see your boarding passes?" Officer Davis asked the twins. Malcolm and Jamal produced their documentation. Officer Davis examined them, then looked at Keith. Their boarding passes matched their seats. "What's the issue?" "It's an internal airline matter," Keith insisted. "We have discretion to reassign seating based on operational needs." "What operational need?" Officer Jackson questioned. "Is there a weight distribution issue? Safety concern?" Keith hesitated. "It's a matter of accommodating our priority passengers." Officer Jackson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "So there's no safety issue. This is a customer service matter." "These men are disrupting the boarding process," Keith argued. "By sitting in their assigned seats." Officer Davis clarified, raising an eyebrow. The exchange continued for several minutes, with Officers Jackson and Davis reviewing the situation with increasing skepticism toward the airline staff's position. Finally, Officer Jackson shook his head. "We don't see any security issue here. These passengers have valid tickets for these specific seats. Unless they're being disruptive, which from what we've observed and heard from other passengers, they're not, there's no cause for removal." Keith's face reddened further as he realized his authority was being undermined. He stepped away to make another call, returning moments later with a woman who introduced herself as Andrea Wilson, the airline's ground supervisor. Andrea quickly assessed the situation, reviewing the documentation and listening to brief statements from all involved. Unlike Keith, she appeared genuinely concerned about resolving the situation fairly. "Mr. Sullivan," she finally said, addressing the businessman directly, "we apologize for the inconvenience, but these passengers are correctly seated according to their purchased tickets. We have one remaining first-class seat available that you're welcome to take, or we can rebook you on the next flight with appropriate compensation." Sullivan's face contorted with barely contained rage. "This is how you treat your platinum members? I'll be speaking to your CEO about this disgraceful service." Andrea remained professional. "That's your prerogative, sir. What would you like to do about today's flight?" After several more minutes of negotiation, Sullivan grudgingly accepted the remaining first-class seat, though it wasn't his preferred location. The security officers departed, and the boarding process resumed. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, nearly 40 minutes behind schedule, the twins endured uncomfortable stares from some passengers and sympathetic glances from others. The flight attendants provided minimal service to Malcolm and Jamal for the remainder of the flight, but the brothers had won this battle. What they couldn't have known was that the war was just beginning. Black twins asked to switch VIP seats for a white passenger. Their call gets the team fired even after the security officers had left and Sullivan had reluctantly taken his reassigned seat. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin remained charged with tension. The flight attendants' professional masks had cracked, revealing thinly veiled hostility as they performed their pre-flight duties. Brenda Miller made a point of checking the twin seatbelts with unnecessary roughness, while Thomas White ignored their section during the initial beverage service. "I guess we're not getting those warm towels," Malcolm muttered to Jamal, attempting humor to lighten the mood. Captain Gerald Stevens's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for our delayed departure. We should be taking off shortly. Flight attendants, prepare for departure." As the plane finally began taxiing, Keith Peterson reappeared from the cockpit. Instead of returning to the terminal as protocol dictated for ground staff, he had apparently decided to have a word with the captain. Now, he stood at the front of the first-class cabin and addressed the passengers. "Folks, I want to apologize for the delay. Unfortunately, we had some confusion with seating arrangements. In the future, we ask that all passengers cooperate with crew instructions to ensure on-time departures." His gaze lingered pointedly on Malcolm and Jamal. The implication was clear: the twins were being publicly framed as troublemakers responsible for delaying everyone's journey. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One businessman in the third row muttered audibly, "Unbelievable." But it wasn't clear whether his comment was directed at the twins or at the airline staff's behavior. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, phones emerged throughout the cabin. The incident had not gone unnoticed, and in the age of social media, public humiliation could quickly become public documentation. A white woman in her 30s across the aisle leaned toward the twins. "I recorded that whole thing," she whispered. "That was completely inappropriate how they treated you. I'm Amy Peters, by the way. I'm an employment attorney." Malcolm nodded gratefully but remained cautious. Years of experience had taught him that moments of injustice were often followed by gaslighting and denial. Without his own recording, it would be their word against the airlines. Halfway through the flight, the tension escalated again when Supervisor Keith made another unexpected appearance. He stopped directly beside their row, speaking just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I want you to know that your behavior today has been noted. Interfering with crew member duties is a serious offense. There could be consequences upon landing." It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Jamal, who had remained the calmer of the two throughout the ordeal, finally reached his breaking point. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood to his full 6-foot height, forcing Keith to step back. "Sir," Jamal began, his voice steady but carrying throughout the now silent first-class cabin, "my brother and I have remained in our assigned seats, spoken respectfully, and complied with all safety instructions. The only disruption today came from your staff's attempt to displace us without cause." He paused, making eye contact with several other passengers who were now watching intently. "We are Morehouse graduates on our way to Harvard Law. We understand our rights and dignity. If you're suggesting there will be consequences for us refusing to give up seats we legally purchased, I invite you to put that in writing for our attorney." Keith's face flushed. Sullivan, from his seat several rows ahead, turned to watch the confrontation with a smirk. "Everyone stay in your seats," Thomas White announced sharply. "This is becoming a security situation." "Is it?" Florence Bennett called out from across the aisle. "Because from where I'm sitting, the only person creating a situation is your supervisor by threatening paying customers." Several passengers nodded in agreement. Phones continued recording. The public nature of the confrontation had transformed from the twins' humiliation into the airline staff's exposure. Security officers, this time different personnel assigned to in-flight security, moved toward the commotion. Officer Gregory Rivera, a Latino man with a trim mustache, assessed the scene with experienced eyes. "What's happening here?" he asked calmly. Before Keith could respond, Walter Bennett spoke up. This airline supervisor is harassing these young men who refused to give up their rightful seats earlier. The security officer turned to Keith. Sir, unless these passengers are creating a disturbance, this appears to be a customer service issue, not security. Keith's authority was being questioned a second time, and his composure cracked. Do you know who that man is? He hissed, pointing toward Sullivan. He brings millions in corporate accounts to this airline. These kids don't understand how the real world works. The slur hung in the air, recorded by at least a dozen phones. Officer Rivera's expression remained professional, but his voice cooled noticeably. Sir, I think you should return to your designated area for the remainder of the flight. As Keith retreated, the first-class cabin erupted in scattered applause. The twins returned to their seats, but the damage to the airline's reputation was already spreading at broadband speeds through the in-flight Wi-Fi. By the time the aircraft began its descent into Boston, the video had begun its ascent to viral status. The twins' ordeal was becoming a movement. What do you think of how Malcolm and Jamal handled this situation? Would you have stood your ground like they did, or would you have moved to avoid the confrontation? Comment 1 if you'd stand firm, or 2 if you'd choose peace and move seats. Like this video if you believe the airline staff's behavior was completely unacceptable, and subscribe to see what happened when this video went viral. How do you think the airline will respond once they land? Will there be more confrontations waiting for them in Boston? When the plane touched down at Boston Logan International Airport, Malcolm and Jamal Harris switched their phones off airplane mode only to be bombarded with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, social media alerts, their devices buzzed incessantly as if possessed. What in the world? Jamal muttered, scrolling through his messages. Malcolm opened his Twitter app and his eyes widened. Jamal, look at this. Their sister Tiffany, a digital marketing manager in Atlanta, had taken action. After receiving Malcolm's recording via their family group chat, she had edited the video, adding captions and context, then shared it across multiple platforms. The hashtag #FirstClassWhileBlack was trending nationally, alongside hashtag Boycott Delta and hashtag #SullivanShame. Tiff didn't waste any time, Jamal said, a mixture of awe and anxiety in his voice. The original video had already amassed over 2 million views on Twitter and was spreading rapidly across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Major news outlets had picked up the story, with headlines ranging from the straightforward, black Harvard-bound twins harassed on Delta flight, to the more provocative, airline attempts to bump black passengers for white executive. As they deplaned, several passengers approached to express support. What happened to you was disgraceful, said Amy Peters, the attorney who had recorded the incident. She handed them her business card. If you need another witness statement, please contact me. Florence and Walter Bennett waited for them at the gate. We've been flying first class for 40 years, Florence said, patting Malcolm's arm. Never seen anything like that. You boys handled yourselves with remarkable dignity. Outside the secure area, a small group of reporters had already gathered. Word had traveled fast. Malcolm and Jamal Harris? A woman with a press badge stepped forward. I'm Stephanie Wong from the Boston Globe. Would you be willing to comment on what happened during your flight today? The twins exchanged glances, their silent communication honed over a lifetime. We appreciate your interest, Jamal replied carefully. But we need to process what happened before making any public statements. As they navigated through the terminal, their phones continued to explode with notifications. A text from their father simply read, "Proud of you boys. Call when you can. We're getting calls too." That evening, in their hotel room, they watched as their story played out across national news. Delta Airlines had issued a statement that felt generated by an algorithm. Delta is aware of a video circulating regarding an incident on flight DL-1382 from Atlanta to Boston. We take all customer concerns seriously and are investigating the situation. Delta is committed to providing a superior experience for all customers. Sullivan Investments had moved even faster, releasing a statement defending their CEO. Raymond Sullivan has been a respected business leader for over 30 years. This incident is being mischaracterized on social media. Mr. Sullivan simply requested appropriate seating based on his frequent flyer status, following standard airline procedures. Any implication of discriminatory intent is false and potentially defamatory. "They're already spinning it," Malcolm observed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Their hotel phone rang, the front desk informing them that several more journalists were asking for interviews. The twins declined politely but firmly. Instead, they called Gloria Patterson, an attorney their pre-law advisor had recommended who specialized in civil rights cases. After hearing their account and reviewing the video, Patterson agreed to meet them the following morning. "Don't delete anything," she advised. "No social media posts from you directly. Let the evidence speak for itself for now." As they tried to sleep that night, their phones continued to ping with messages of support, media requests, and unfortunately, a growing number of racist comments and threats as the story became more polarized. "You should see what they're saying about Mom and Dad," Jamal said, scrolling through his phone in the darkness. Their parents had begun receiving calls at home. Some supportive, others harassing. Delta representatives called the house, his father texted. "Asking us to discuss the situation privately. I told them to contact you directly." The next morning, Gloria Patterson arrived at their hotel precisely at 8 a.m. In her early 50s with locks pulled back into a professional bun, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought and won many battles. "First things first," she said after introductions. "This isn't just about one incident. My paralegal did some preliminary research overnight and found 3 similar complaints against that same flight crew in the past year. All involving black passengers in premium cabins." Malcolm and Jamal exchanged glances. "So this is a pattern," Malcolm said. "Potentially," Gloria nodded. "Which strengthens our position considerably." She laid out preliminary options, from a private settlement to a public lawsuit that could establish precedent. As they discussed strategy, Gloria's assistant interrupted with breaking news. An internal Delta email had been leaked to the press, revealing that Raymond Sullivan had been coded in the airline system as a VIP customer, someone to be given preferential treatment, regardless of boarding status or ticketing issues. "This directly contradicts their statement about standard procedures," Gloria observed, a small smile playing at her lips. "The court of public opinion is already in session, but the actual courtroom may be next." By midday, the video had surpassed 20 million views. Civil rights organizations had issued statements. Celebrity influencers were sharing and commenting. What had begun as a personal humiliation was transforming into a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the persistent reality of discrimination in everyday American life. Meanwhile, Sullivan's company was facing its own crisis. Clients began questioning their association with Sullivan Investments. The company's stock price dipped as #SullivanShame trended. Corporate partners issued carefully worded statements about their commitment to diversity and inclusion, the corporate equivalent of creating distance. That evening, Delta's HR director Philip Anderson called Gloria's office, requesting a private meeting to resolve the unfortunate misunderstanding. "They're offering a settlement with an NDA," Gloria explained to the twins. $50,000 each and lifetime premium status. "In exchange for our silence," Malcolm stated rather than asked. Gloria nodded. "This isn't about money for them. It's about containing the damage." Jamal, who had been quietly contemplative, finally spoke. "If we take it, nothing changes. The same thing happens to someone else next month or next year." "Exactly," Malcolm agreed. "We didn't ask for this fight, but now that it's here, we need to see it through." Gloria smiled slightly. "I told them you'd say that. Their offer will go up considerably before this is over." What none of them realized yet was just how high the stakes would become, or how far Sullivan and his allies would go to discredit the twins and protect the status quo their privilege depended upon. The internal machinery of Delta Airlines sprang into damage control mode with practiced efficiency. Within 48 hours of the incident, their investigation team had compiled a report that framed the entire confrontation as a regrettable miscommunication regarding premium cabin protocols. Philip Anderson, Delta's HR director, arrived at Gloria Patterson's office with the polish and confidence of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, his silver tie knotted with precision, and his smile calculated to convey both authority and reasonability. "Ms. Patterson," he began after declining coffee, "we value all our customers and deeply regret the experience these young men had on our flight. Delta has a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion." Gloria's expression remained impassive. "I'm sure that's a comfort to all the black passengers who've been asked to move for white customers." Anderson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That characterization doesn't reflect our company values or policies. After thorough investigation, we've determined this was an unfortunate misunderstanding about our Platinum member accommodation guidelines." He slid a folder across the desk. "We're prepared to offer Mr. and Mr. Harris our sincere apologies, full refunds for their tickets, travel vouchers for future flights, and a settlement of $100,000 each." He paused for effect. "We'd also like to invite them to participate in our Customer Experience Advisory Panel." Gloria didn't touch the folder. "And the non-disclosure agreement? The one that prevents them from discussing this misunderstanding publicly?" "Standard legal protection," Anderson replied smoothly. "Not unusual in these situations." "And the flight crew involved? They'll receive additional customer service training, of course." Gloria leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Anderson, let me be clear. My clients were humiliated, threatened, and discriminated against. Your staff created a hostile environment based on race, violated DOT regulations, and potentially broke federal civil rights laws. This folder," she tapped it with one manicured nail, "is insufficient." Anderson's facade cracked slightly. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Accountability. Policy change. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And yes, appropriate compensation that reflects the severity of this incident." Anderson gathered his folder. "I'll need to consult with our legal team about these demands." "While you're consulting," Gloria added, "you should know we've been contacted by Letitia Johnson, a former Delta flight attendant who witnessed similar incidents involving the same crew members. She's willing to testify." The color drained from Anderson's face. "That would be unfortunate." "For Delta, certainly," Gloria agreed. "We'll await your revised offer." After Anderson departed, Gloria called the twins with an update. "They're worried," she explained. "But this is just the beginning. Sullivan has connections on Delta's board. He's going to push back hard." Her prediction proved accurate. That same afternoon, internal documents were anonymously leaked to the twins' Morehouse email addresses, flight manifests showing that Sullivan had indeed been coded as requiring priority accommodation regardless of ticket status. The source, presumably a sympathetic airline employee, included a message, "This happens all the time. Usually people just move without fighting." While Gloria worked to authenticate these documents, Delta's CEO William Thompson appeared on CNBC's Closing Bell to address the controversy. What occurred was a service failure, not discrimination, Thompson insisted, his corporate training evident in every measured word. Delta transports thousands of diverse passengers daily without incident. We're using this opportunity to reinforce our commitment to equitable treatment for all customers. The carefully crafted statement might have diffused the situation in earlier times. But in the current climate, with the video continuing to spread and public sentiment overwhelmingly supporting the twins, it came across as tone-deaf and dismissive. "They're trying to wait it out," Gloria explained during their next meeting. "Standard corporate strategy, express generic regret, avoid admitting specific wrongdoing, wait for public attention to shift elsewhere. But the twins faced mounting pressure of their own. Sullivan's connections extended beyond the airline industry. Harvard Law School began receiving calls questioning whether the twins' scholarships should be reconsidered in light of their confrontational behavior. "It's a scare tactic," Gloria assured them. "Harvard won't rescind your admissions over this. If anything, standing up to discrimination demonstrates exactly the kind of character they value." Nevertheless, the pressure was real and mounting. The twins' parents reported strange cars parked outside their Atlanta home. Their sister Tiffany received anonymous messages warning her to stop spreading lies. Every aspect of the twins' lives was being scrutinized by both supporters and detractors. The decision they faced was significant. Accept an increasingly generous settlement with an NDA and move on with their lives and careers, or pursue a more public fight for accountability that carried both greater potential impact and greater personal cost. The settlement offer is now up to $300,000 each, Gloria informed them. They're getting nervous about the former employees coming forward. Indeed, Letitia Johnson wasn't the only one. 2 more former Delta employees had contacted Gloria's office with similar accounts of preferential treatment for certain passengers at the expense of others, with patterns that suggested racial bias. More damaging still, an internal training document had surfaced showing that flight attendants were instructed to accommodate high-value customers during seating conflicts by offering incentives to other passengers to relocate. While the policy didn't explicitly mention race, its implementation statistics told a different story. "They have policies that are neutral on paper but discriminatory in practice," Gloria explained. "That's harder to prove but potentially more impactful as a legal case." Malcolm and Jamal sat in Gloria's office, contemplating their options. The settlement money would eliminate their student loans. The NDA would allow them to put this behind them and focus on their education. The path of least resistance beckoned seductively. "What would you do?" Jamal asked Gloria. She considered the question carefully. "I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you that in 25 years of practicing law, the cases I'm most proud of aren't the ones with the biggest settlements. They're the ones that changed policies and practices." Malcolm looked at his brother, their unspoken communication as clear as it had been since childhood. "We didn't ask for this spotlight," he said finally. "But now that we have it, maybe we're supposed to use it." Jamal nodded. "Mom and Dad always taught us that standing up for what's right isn't supposed to be easy." "So we're declining the settlement," Malcolm confirmed. Gloria smiled slightly. "I'll inform Delta's legal team. Prepare yourselves, this is when things will get ugly." She wasn't wrong. Within days, Sullivan's influence became even more apparent. Articles began appearing online questioning the twins' character. An anonymous source claimed they had been disruptive on previous flights. Social media accounts with suspiciously recent creation dates shared supposed eyewitness accounts, contradicting the video evidence. The corporate machine was fighting back with all its resources. But it had underestimated the power of authentic truth in the age of digital accountability. And the determination of 2 young men who had spent their entire lives preparing for moments exactly like this one. The media landscape transformed into a battlefield where truth competed with corporate spin in a war for public opinion. National news networks that had initially covered the story as a viral video curiosity now dedicated entire segments to exploring its broader implications. Cable news panels debated the finer points of airline seating policies, corporate accountability, and America's ongoing struggle with racial bias in customer service. Malcolm and Jamal found themselves thrust into the spotlight as reluctant symbols of resistance. After careful preparation with Gloria and a media consultant she brought onto the team, they agreed to a single television interview with respected journalist Diane Sawyer. Seated side by side in matching navy suits on the studio set, the twins presented a unified image of composure and articulate determination. "We never wanted to become the faces of this issue," Jamal explained when asked about their motivation. We simply refuse to be treated as less deserving of dignity than any other passenger. Malcolm added, this isn't about first-class seats. It's about first-class citizenship. The right to exist in spaces you've legitimately earned without having your presence questioned. The interview resonated powerfully, showcasing their intelligence and measured responses. Social media erupted with support, with the segment being viewed over 30 million times within 24 hours. Raymond Sullivan, however, was not content to let the twins control the narrative. 2 days after their interview, he appeared on a conservative business network with his own version of events. This has been completely mischaracterized, Sullivan insisted, his expression one of wounded innocence. I'm a victim of reverse discrimination and social media mob mentality. These young men caused a scene to generate viral content and advance an agenda. The host nodded sympathetically. So you're saying you were targeted because you're a successful white businessman? Sullivan sighed dramatically. Look, I've worked hard for 40 years. I fly over 100,000 miles annually. The airline's own policies state that platinum members receive seating priority. This isn't about race. It's about certain people feeling entitled to special treatment they haven't earned. The irony of his statement was not lost on viewers familiar with the original incident, but Sullivan's interview launched a coordinated counteroffensive. Right-wing commentators began framing the incident as anti-success activism. Bot accounts flooded social media with hashtags like #SullivanWasRight and #entitlement culture. More disturbing were the death threats that began arriving at the twins' parents' home in Atlanta. The messages were graphic enough that the family contacted local police, who recommended temporary relocation. This is getting dangerous, Curtis Harris told his sons during a video call. Your mother barely sleeps worrying about you boys. We can end this, Jamal suggested, the weight of their parents' concern heavy in his voice. Take the settlement. Malcolm's expression hardened. That's exactly what they want. To make standing up for yourself so costly and dangerous that people choose to stay quiet. Their father nodded slowly. Your mother and I didn't raise you to back down from what's right. We just need you to be careful. Gloria Patterson's investigation continued to uncover damaging information. A former flight attendant who had worked with Brenda Miller came forward with text messages showing Miller had complained about having to serve those people in first class on multiple occasions. Sullivan's travel records revealed a pattern of similar incidents where other passengers had been displaced to accommodate him, with a disproportionate number involving people of color. Most damaging of all, Gloria discovered that Sullivan had filed complaints against 5 different black flight attendants over the past 3 years for attitude problems and inadequate deference, resulting in several transfers and 1 termination. He has a history, Gloria explained during a strategy meeting. And so does Delta's response to his complaints. Harvard Law School, despite reported pressure from certain donors, issued a statement affirming the twins' admission and scholarships, noting that standing up against perceived injustice demonstrates precisely the moral courage we seek to develop in future legal professionals. The public relations battle intensified when Sullivan's company faced unexpected consequences. 3 major clients announced they were reviewing their relationship with Sullivan Investments. A scheduled appearance at a financial conference was cancelled. The corporate world, hypersensitive to potential reputational damage, began creating distance. Sullivan's response was to hire crisis management firm Brunswick Group, which launched a sophisticated campaign to rehabilitate his image. Suddenly, articles appeared about Sullivan's previously unpublicized charitable donations. A profile piece highlighted his challenging childhood and self-made success. Anonymous sources suggested the twins were capitalizing on the incident for financial gain. Gloria anticipated each move. This is straight from the playbook, she told the twins. They'll try to paint Sullivan as the real victim and you as opportunists. We need to stay focused on the facts and the pattern of behavior. The twins maintained their dignified silence on social media, letting the evidence and their supporters speak for them. Civil rights organizations rallied behind their cause. The NAACP issued a statement calling for a federal investigation into discrimination in commercial air travel. Black business travelers shared their own stories of similar treatment using #FlyingWhileBlack. Delta's stock price began to reflect the controversy, dropping 7% over 2 weeks as a boycott movement gained momentum. Institutional investors questioned the company's handling of the situation during the quarterly earnings call. The pressure on both Delta and Sullivan continued to mount. Through it all, Malcolm and Jamal prepared for their upcoming court date, working closely with Gloria to build their case. The media circus and corporate counterattacks had transformed what began as a simple refusal to give up their seats into a landmark case with potential implications for the entire travel industry. As they reviewed their depositions late one evening, Jamal looked up at his brother. "Did you ever imagine our first legal case would be our own?" Malcolm shook his head. "No. But maybe that's exactly why we needed to go to law school in the first place." Their fight was far from over, but with each passing day, more evidence emerged to support their stand. The power dynamic was shifting, and the twins, once expected to quietly accept their displacement, were now the ones applying pressure to a system unaccustomed to being held accountable. The United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts buzzed with anticipation on the morning the Harris twins case opened. The historic courthouse, with its imposing columns and marble hallways, had witnessed many pivotal civil rights moments, but few had generated the public attention of Harris versus Delta Airlines. News vans lined the street outside. Supporters held signs with messages like, "First-class citizens deserve first-class seats," and "Stand against discrimination." A smaller group of counter-protesters, many wearing Sullivan Investments caps distributed that morning, carried competing messages about respect for business leaders and anti-white discrimination. Inside Courtroom 3, Malcolm and Jamal sat beside Gloria Patterson and her legal team. Across the aisle, Delta's defense was led by Christopher Hayes, a legendary corporate attorney whose clients included major airlines, pharmaceutical companies, and tech giants. His reputation for aggressive defense strategies and his $1,200 hourly rate reflected his effectiveness at protecting corporate interests. Sullivan himself sat behind the Delta team, his presence a testament to his personal stake in the outcome. His eyes never met the twins, but his jaw remained clenched throughout the proceedings. Judge Marilyn Lawson, a 63-year-old black woman with 3 decades on the federal bench, entered the courtroom. Her reputation for meticulous adherence to procedure and intolerance for grandstanding had attorneys from both sides on their best behavior. "This court will come to order," the bailiff announced as everyone rose. Judge Lawson surveyed the packed gallery before addressing the attorneys. "I understand there's significant public interest in this case, but this courtroom will maintain decorum at all times. This is not a venue for political statements or media performances. Are we clear?" Both legal teams nodded their agreement. Christopher Hayes delivered Delta's opening statement with practiced eloquence. "Your Honor, this case represents a fundamental misunderstanding of airline operations and an attempt to inject racial animus where none existed. Delta Airlines has a well-established protocol for managing premium cabin seating that considers multiple factors including frequent flyer status, ticket class, and operational needs. The plaintiff's refusal to comply with standard crew instructions created an unnecessary disruption that inconvenienced all passengers." Gloria Patterson's opening presented a starkly different narrative. "This case is about more than 2 seats on an airplane. It's about a pattern of behavior in which certain passengers are deemed more valuable and more worthy of dignity than others. The evidence will show that Delta Airlines, through its employees, engaged in discriminatory practices that violated both federal transportation regulations and basic human decency." Over the following days, witnesses took the stand one by one. Brenda Miller insisted that her actions had nothing to do with race, but struggled to explain why the twins were specifically targeted for removal when they held valid tickets. Under Gloria's cross-examination, she admitted that no white passengers had been asked to relocate during her 3 years working first-class cabins. Thomas White similarly faltered when presented with his employment record, which included 2 previous complaints about disparate treatment of minority passengers that had been settled quietly. Keith Peterson maintained his insistence that he was simply following company protocol for VIP accommodation, but couldn't produce any written policy supporting his claim when pressed by Gloria. "Is it your testimony, Mr. Peterson, that Delta Airlines has an unwritten policy of displacing certain paying customers to accommodate others deemed more valuable?" Gloria asked. "That's not what I said," Peterson replied defensively. "Then please clarify exactly what policy justified asking my clients to surrender seats they had legally purchased." Peterson's explanation grew increasingly convoluted as he attempted to avoid directly answering the question. The most damaging testimony came from Raymond Sullivan himself. Initially presenting as a poised executive victimized by circumstance, his composure deteriorated under Gloria's methodical questioning. "Mr. Sullivan, prior to boarding this flight, did you contact anyone at Delta regarding your seating preferences?" Gloria asked. "I speak with my dedicated concierge team regularly," Sullivan replied vaguely. Gloria presented an email exchange between Sullivan and his Delta VIP coordinator, in which he specifically complained about being assigned a window seat rather than his preferred aisle and requested appropriate accommodations. "Did you expect the airline to displace other passengers to meet your preferences?" Gloria pressed. "I expected appropriate service as a platinum member who brings significant business to the airline," Sullivan responded, his voice tightening. "And what, in your view, constitutes appropriate service?" Sullivan's facade cracked. "Look, there's a natural order to these things. People who contribute more to a business deserve preferential treatment. That's how the world works. And in your view, my clients hadn't contributed enough to deserve their seats. They were clearly first-time first-class passengers," Sullivan snapped. "Probably using upgrades or points. I pay full fare every time I fly." Gloria let his words hang in the air. "No further questions, Your Honor." Officer Jackson's testimony directly contradicted the airline's official narrative. "In my 12 years as an aviation security officer, I've responded to numerous removal requests," he explained. "This was the only instance where I found no legitimate basis for removal. The passengers were seated correctly and behaving appropriately." The most surprising turn came when a former Delta executive, Bernard Thompson, testified about the airline's unwritten passenger value calculation system that assigned numerical scores to customers based on their perceived worth to the company. "The algorithm considers obvious factors like frequent flyer status and ticket price," Thompson explained. "But our analysis found it also correlates with passenger demographics in troubling ways." When Christopher Hayes objected to this testimony as irrelevant, Judge Lawson overruled him. "The witness is establishing context for the airline's decision-making process, which is central to this case." As the trial progressed, Delta's legal team attempted to have Judge Lawson recused, suggesting her own experiences as a black woman might bias her judgment. The transparent maneuver backfired spectacularly, drawing public condemnation and strengthening the impression that Delta was grasping at straws. Gloria's masterful case construction built toward her closing argument, where she connected the twins' experience to the broader history of transportation discrimination in America. "Your Honor, this case exists in historical context. From segregated railcars to Rosa Parks bus to these first-class seats, transportation has always been a battleground for dignity and equality in America. When Malcolm and Jamal Harris were told to surrender seats they had rightfully purchased, they weren't just facing a customer service issue. They were facing the same fundamental question that has plagued our nation since its founding: who deserves full and equal access to public accommodations?" She paused, letting the question resonate. The evidence presented demonstrates that Delta Airlines, through its employees, engaged in discriminatory practices. They attempted to displace qualified black passengers to accommodate a white passenger deemed more valuable. When challenged, they escalated to threats and public humiliation. These actions violated federal regulations, the airline's own stated policies, and basic human dignity. Christopher Hayes' closing argument emphasized corporate policy and the challenges of in-the-moment decision-making by flight crews. He characterized the incident as regrettable, but maintained it resulted from miscommunication rather than discrimination. As Judge Lawson recessed to consider her ruling, the twins found themselves at the center of a national conversation much larger than their individual experience. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into a potential landmark case with implications for how corporations value and treat all customers. Whatever the court's decision, Malcolm and Jamal Harris had already accomplished something remarkable. They had forced a public accounting from powerful institutions unaccustomed to explaining themselves. Now they awaited the final verdict that would determine whether this accounting would translate into lasting change. Judge Marilyn Lawson's courtroom was filled beyond capacity on the day of her ruling. Those who couldn't find seats inside gathered around smartphones and tablets in the hallway, watching live streams from court-approved cameras. The case had captured national attention, transforming from a viral video to a significant legal precedent in the making. Malcolm and Jamal Harris sat straight-backed beside Gloria Patterson, their expressions composed despite the pressure of the moment. Across the aisle, Delta's legal team appeared tense, while Raymond Sullivan's seat remained conspicuously empty, his absence noted by several commentators as the action of a man who could dish out humiliation but not receive it. Judge Lawson entered and the courtroom rose in unison. After everyone was seated, she adjusted her glasses and began. In the case of Harris v. Delta Airlines, she stated, her voice clear and deliberate, this court has carefully considered all evidence and testimony presented. The question before us is whether the plaintiffs were subjected to discriminatory treatment and, if so, what remedies are appropriate. She spent the next 40 minutes methodically reviewing the evidence, legal precedents, and applicable regulations. The room remained silent except for the occasional tap of journalists' keyboards. The preponderance of evidence indicates that Delta Airlines, through its employees, engaged in discriminatory practices in violation of federal transportation regulations and civil rights statutes. The testimony and documentation reveal a pattern of preferential treatment that disproportionately disadvantaged minority passengers. A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs and orders the following remedies. Delta Airlines shall pay compensatory damages of $2 million to each plaintiff for the humiliation and emotional distress caused by this incident. The airline shall implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing personnel, subject to review by civil rights experts. Additionally, Delta must revise its passenger priority policies to ensure transparent and non-discriminatory application. Judge Lawson looked directly at the twins. While no court ruling can fully address the indignity suffered by Mr. Malcolm Harris and Mr. Jamal Harris, this decision affirms that their rights as consumers and as citizens deserve equal protection under the law. As the courtroom erupted in muted reaction, Gloria squeezed her client's hands. "We won," she whispered. "Completely." Outside, reporters swarmed around them as they exited the courthouse. Gloria handled most questions, but Malcolm stepped forward to make a brief statement. "Today's ruling isn't just about our experience. It's about establishing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. We hope this case helps ensure that other passengers don't face similar treatment in the future." The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Delta Airlines issued a public apology, acknowledging that the incident failed to reflect our values and promising substantial changes. Within a week, the airline announced the termination of flight attendants Brenda Miller and Thomas White, supervisor Keith Peterson, and several higher-level executives who had attempted to cover up the pattern of discrimination. CEO William Thompson, facing pressure from the board of directors, held a press conference announcing the company's commitment to transformative change in its training and customer service policies. The airline established an independent diversity advisory council and revised its frequent flyer policies to ensure more transparent and equitable application. The ripple effects extended throughout the industry. Other major airlines preemptively reviewed their own practices. The Department of Transportation launched an investigation into systemic discrimination in air travel, resulting in new regulatory guidelines. Sullivan faced his own reckoning. As more details of his behavior emerged, including previous incidents with other minority passengers, Sullivan Investments experienced a client exodus. Major corporations, sensitive to their own reputations, terminated their relationships with his firm. After 2 weeks of devastating losses, Sullivan resigned as CEO, citing a desire to focus on personal matters. For Malcolm and Jamal, the victory came with both opportunities and responsibilities. After careful consideration, they established the Harris Equity in Transportation Scholarship, using $1 million of their settlement to support minority students pursuing careers in transportation policy, law, and management. We want to ensure that the next generation has the tools to build more equitable systems, Jamal explained during the scholarship's launch event. Harvard Law School embraced the twins' experience, incorporating their case into the curriculum as an example of modern civil rights advocacy. Dean Elizabeth Morgan personally welcomed them to campus, noting that these young men have already demonstrated the kind of moral courage and strategic thinking we hope to instill in all our students. 3 years later, as they approached graduation, Malcolm and Jamal were invited to deliver a special lecture to first-year law students. Standing at the podium in Harvard's historic Ames courtroom, they reflected on their journey. When we boarded that flight, Malcolm told the packed room, we were just 2 guys excited about starting law school. We had no idea we were about to receive our first real legal education. Jamal continued, what we learned is that justice rarely arrives without someone demanding it. Systems don't change themselves, people change systems by refusing to accept injustice as normal. After graduation, the twins established Harris & Harris, a law firm specializing in transportation discrimination cases. Their reputation for taking on powerful interests and winning made them both respected and feared in corporate boardrooms. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Malcolm and Jamal boarded another first-class flight. This time, the experience was markedly different. The flight attendants were genuinely welcoming. The service was impeccable. Their right to occupy the space went unquestioned. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome aboard Malcolm and Jamal Harris. Some of you may recognize them as the attorneys whose landmark case transformed airline service policies. Their courage reminds us that positive change is possible when people stand up for what's right." Applause rippled through the cabin. The twins nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the recognition of their impact. "Did you ever imagine this is where we'd end up?" Jamal asked his brother quietly. Malcolm shook his head. "Not specifically. But Mom and Dad always told us we were meant to make a difference." "They were right," Jamal replied, looking out at the clouds below. "Though I bet they didn't expect it to start with a flight attendant asking us to move seats." Sometimes the most significant journeys begin with the simple act of refusing to be displaced. This powerful story of Malcolm and Jamal Harris teaches us that dignity isn't negotiable. When faced with discrimination, their refusal to accept second-class treatment transformed a personal humiliation into systemic change. Their courage reminds us that justice often requires someone willing to stand firm despite pressure and potential consequences. The twins' experience demonstrates how racism often hides behind policies and protocols that appear neutral but are applied selectively. By recording the incident and pursuing accountability rather than accepting quiet compensation, they created transparency that forced meaningful change. Perhaps most importantly, this case shows the power of preparation meeting opportunity. The twins' education, articulate communication, and knowledge of their rights equipped them to challenge injustice effectively. Their parents' wisdom, "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far," proved true, but so did the twins' belief that standing up for oneself can create a better path for those who follow. In the end, the Harris brothers transformed an airline's culture not because they sought to become activists, but because they refused to accept being treated with less dignity than they deserved. What moment in your life required you to stand up for your dignity or someone else's? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Comment below with your experiences. If this story of overcoming racism inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs strength to face injustice in their own life. Thank you for watching, and remember, your courage today creates a more just tomorrow for everyone.